Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Martin Postma. I will be giving a speech tonight on dissociative identity disorder. This is my lovely, darling lady wife, who will be my audience. Thank you, darling lady wife.
You're welcome.
So, have you ever been driving a long distance and you suddenly realize you don't know how you got from point A to point B? Maybe you missed your turn. What you've experienced is called highway hypnosis. And according to Deborah Haddock, this highway hypnosis is actually a mild form of dissociation. I wanted to give this speech tonight to highlight a dissociative disorder that is near and dear to my heart, one that I find both heartbreaking and fascinating, and one that I someday hope to work with people to help them overcome and live more fulfilling lives. By the end of this presentation, I hope you will go away with a greater understanding of what DID is, its causes, and a heightened sense of compassion for those who suffer from this disorder. Dissociation exists on a scale, and as mentioned with the highway hypnosis example, everyone experiences dissociation to some degree on the lower end of the spectrum. Dissociative identity disorder, or DID, is what happens on the far extreme sense of the scale. So what is DID? Well, originally DID was known as multiple personality disorder, or MPD, and was reclassified by the American Psychiatric Association in 2013 with the release of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM-5. The defining feature of DID is the existence of two or more distinct alters or personality states within the individual. These personality states can go by several different names, one of which can be alters, ego states, personalities, parts. It really just depends on what you're most comfortable with using. For the purpose of this presentation, I will be using the term alters. So the difference between alters can be subtle. It can also be markedly different. Alters can vary in speech patterns, in dominant handedness, allergen requirements, and even vision needs. Alters also have a tendency to range in age identification. You can have alters that are very young and alters who claim to be very old. So what's the difference, or correction, what is the connection between alters and dissociation? Well, when a person is faced with extreme periods of stress, the body will dissociate, or the mind will dissociate, in an attempt to separate the person from the trauma that they're experiencing. In children before the ages of 8 and 9, such serial trauma and dissociation will actually alter the physical structures of the brain in ways that are still being understood. The stress hormones released by the body will burn new synaptic pathways within the brain until dissociation becomes a learned process and unconscious behavior. Usually by the age of 9, a person's sense of self has solidified, but if the trauma has become so serial and innate in the person's life, dissociation may become a constant presence in the individual. Now, you've probably heard at least of DID and seen it portrayed in films and literature. What you may not know is that these portrayals are often grossly overdramatic and misrepresentative. So let's start with a couple of myths. Myth number 1 is people with DID have multiple people living inside of them. While this may seem like it's the case, a better understanding is that each alter is a member of the one individual, one part. As J.D. Clark stated best in his book, The Patchwork Quilt, an alter is like a blanket, or alters are like pieces of a blanket that have been cut up. Myth number 2, DID is a rare disorder. In fact, DID is thought to occur in 1.5% of the U.S. population, and while that may not seem like a huge percentage, that's nearly 5 million people. Myth number 3, the cause of DID is unknown. The fact is, DID is caused by trauma in early childhood. It's been found that in the United States, Europe, and Canada, 90% of the people who have the DID diagnosis suffered or report having a history of childhood trauma. Myth number 4, DID is always obvious. And that's just not true. The entire purpose of DID is to hide and protect the individual from trauma. It is rarely obvious, and millions of people live their entire lives just going about day to day without their loved ones or families ever knowing that something is amiss. And lastly, people with DID are violent or have superhuman abilities. People with DID are no more prone to violence than anyone else, and so far there have been no recorded cases of superheroes or villains with dissociative identity disorder. So in summation, DID is a complex and often greatly misunderstood disorder within American society. An individual with DID has been through severe trauma during their childhood and will have one or more distinct alter states within their personalities, none of which will grant them superpowers or homicidal tendencies. I sincerely hope that this presentation has left you with a greater understanding of DID, its causes, and a heightened sense of compassion for those who suffer from the diagnosis. Hopefully someday the fear and stigmatization surrounding DID will end and people will be able to live more greatly and freely within our society. Thank you very much.